You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. Our goal is to not only share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon in conversations about what we're learning and what God is doing in our lives and our community. You can find out more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
We get you in trouble with people right off the bat. What was the best thing you ate at the potluck on Palm Sunday?
I mean, it's just so rare to have good barbecue. So Steve Baudelier's pulled pork.
And homemade sauce.
And homemade sauce. I had it with the homemade sauce.
Takes it to another level.
So good. I always look forward to the jambalaya, and it was at the end of the line, so my plate was already full, and I was like, no, I gotta come back.
That was delicious. There was some kind of chicken enchilada.
Oh yeah, I had that. That was good.
Was tasty. Yeah, I don't think I ate anything that was bad.
Yeah, I got the last shrimp and that shrimp thing.
Oh yeah, that was gone by the time I got there. The deviled eggs were gone by the time I got there. There was one scoop of green bean casserole left by the time I got there.
The Lord provides. It was a good time, and then our kids got together for the quickest of mission team meetings. It was good, and and our Sunday schools combined because it was Fifth Sunday.
Yeah,
which I would love to hear your story. One of the small group questions was a time that you followed the advice of a peer, and you shouldn't have it followed the advice of a peer.
Oh gosh, I don't listen to bad advice very often.
Or if you listen, that's what makes it good advice.
Right.
Maybe as simple as a bad food recommendation, because I know I'm not on that list.
Or one of the worst times I listened to a friend was when a friend said, "Hey, there's this race coming up. We should run this race."
No training?
I had not run distance at that point in my life. Mm-hmm. I'd been doing some workout exercises and stuff like that, some lifting and that kind of stuff. Was not a runner. Mm-hmm. 25K race. For those of you in the U.S., that's about 15 miles. And the race was in 5 weeks. And so I went from not running to almost dying on a 25K race. Wow. 5 weeks later. It was terrible for multiple reasons.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where was the race held?
At the source of the Nile in Uganda.
That's pretty cool. At least location's cool.
Yeah.
To make it worth it to push and torture yourself.
Yep. But 100% do not recommend.
Oh, yeah. No, I think I found, with a lot of people with backpacking, it seems like the first time is always horrible because you're unprepared, you don't know what to anticipate, all that kind of stuff. So
make bad gear choices.
My first time was horrible. Joey, who tried to make me a degenerate gambler, if you're in Sunday school, you understand. That first time I took him backpacking, he wore jeans and we did 20 miles that day.
Oh, that's a choice.
It was a choice. And his chub rub was so bad between his thighs that he bled.
Yeah.
And at the mile 19 mark, he was waddling like a cowboy with his legs spread apart. I was like, we have to call it a night. This isn't good for anybody. And so...
Yikes.
Yeah, so I'm sure I was probably the friend that at that time, he was like, I shouldn't have listened, but he was just overly confident, which is a poor characteristic sometimes of his. Mm-hmm. Within your sermon, I was really interested in, I feel like it's probably the last third of your sermon, talking about you seeking the lowest seat.
Yeah.
Could you start us off by refreshing us on what you meant by finding the lowest seat at any given time?
Yeah, so in Luke 14, Jesus tells a parable about, he says, imagine you go to a wedding feast and you choose a high seat and the host comes to you and says, oh, sorry, there's someone more important than you. You need to go and sit over here. And then, or imagine if you sat in a low seat and then the host comes in and like, oh no, friend, come and sit up here where the important people are. Is kind of the idea of it. And so then the principle that's come out of it for me is, whatever situation I find myself in, what's the lowest seat God will allow me to take? Mm-hmm. And I don't usually mean that in an actual literal sense of like
kid chair from the nursery
at the toddler table, but like in leadership, in ministry, as opportunities present themselves, as I find myself in context of leadership and stuff, like how can I choose to take the lowest seat that God will let me, rather than trying to grasp my way higher or, jump the class and get to the top seat. And so that's kind of become a life principle for me. Take the low seat. That's the recap. What was the question?
The question is, when were you shooting for the lower seat? You were pushed into a higher place of position, and you really wish you could have stayed in that lower seat.
You mean like becoming a senior pastor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a long time I was quite content to stay in an associate pastor kind of role.
Oh, I'm living it. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a very easy one. I wasn't particularly looking to become a senior pastor. I've told the story on here before about, where we were at Trinity and asking God about church planting and that kind of stuff. And we'd gotten to the point where we were like, okay, Jesus, we'll just stay here and be faithful here and do what you're asking us to do. And then all of a sudden, here we are being announced as senior pastor. I'm like, didn't quite see that coming, or at least certainly not that way.
Yeah.
And so that's an easy one to point to. But I think even when we were in Uganda, because of the way missionary life works, there's always people coming and going from the field because they've got to go back and do fundraising. Life events happen. They've got kids graduating, going to college, that kind of stuff. And so people are always coming and going, and definitely found myself early on. Gosh, we got there in May. And I want to say it was like July. We had kind of gotten settled in, and then our teammates told us, hey, we just found out we're pregnant with twins, and we're going to be going back to the States to have the twins there. And so that happened fairly quickly. We were left there 8 hours outside of the capital, only missionaries with our organization, and very quickly became, the one everyone was asking questions to about our pastoral training program and setting things up and what else needs, and all that kind of stuff. And again, not a role I was ready for or looking for, but you do what you got to do when God doesn't give you any other options.
Yeah. Any
instances in your life? I mean, it's not your life principle, so you don't have to say yes. But
yeah, no, it's in youth ministry as a whole. As I tell my volunteers and my kids, I loved being a youth volunteer.
Yeah.
Like, I was going to say you couldn't find a better youth volunteer, but you definitely could. You definitely could. Now that I'm a youth pastor, I was like, oh, as a volunteer towards the youth, like, leadership, I might have not been the best. Really great with the kids.
Sure.
But I don't do good with power structures. Yeah, so I think that switch and transition was definitely not the role that I was seeking. And this was not a role I was seeking. And even like, I think more like temporary roles where like when you went away out west.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, got to hold down the fort. Luckily, everything's usually calm and chill through the week. And got preach, step up, and people help me with like other parts of the service. And then that first week, everything
didn't quite go smoothly, huh?
all the stuff going on with the Mayfair didn't go to plan.
Yeah.
No musicians of our musicians were there that Sunday. That was not known to me when you were leaving and known to anybody. And so having to put together a praise team for that Sunday and practice with them on top of all the other prep and the Mayfair and all those things I forget. And so that was definitely like, for me, my anticipation was as low as possible while still fulfilling the duties.
Right.
And then I ended up being the leader of everything.
It's fun, isn't it?
That's a word. But God provided, and it was a way to just see him at work and provide through everything. And so it built more of my confidence and faith in him, which I think any experience that does that is well worth it. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned the difficulty, you mentioned in your sermon the difficulty some have with cross-racial appointments. Growing up at Pittman, we did have an associate at one point, Pastor Kim, but he's the reason why I'm really good at ping pong. Korean pastor, and he had a custom paddle from Korea.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
High level.
And that's why I hold the ping pong paddle more Penn style, they call it, which for most people is like upside down. I hold it upside down. Is because of him. And there were interesting dynamics that I wasn't aware of until later as a youth. I'm just like,
sure.
But just that at the time we had a female pastor above him, and within the Korean church, they don't normally have the women lead over the men.
Yeah.
And so I think that was interesting, eye-opening, and I can see sometimes the cultural differences. And then sometimes it's like, well, they have an accent that's hard to understand.
Yeah, sometimes it's just as simple as that.
Get upset or that. But I found that cross-racial appointments, specifically in the Catholic Church, is one of the most beautiful things I've seen. Yeah. Where, again, the better or worse for various reasons, the consistency of the Catholic Church, their services, how they're run all over the world, leads to a place where, with the consistent service and the consistent theology throughout the Catholic Church, that you're able to flip-flop pastors and people kind of generally know what they're getting theologically during the service. And so I was in the Poconos at our Pocono house and got to visit, maybe it was a funeral for my neighbor. I know I've gotten to go a couple services, and there was a guy from, I think it was from Nigeria, who the main pastor was away on a sabbatical or something else for a couple of months, and they flew a guy in from Nigeria, and he was their interim pastor for a couple of months, and he did the service or the funeral, whichever, and I was like, this is incredible. Yeah. This feels like the universal church, the Catholic Church, the church of the world that God is doing, that we're able to just, brothers and sisters, the gospel ain't, Yeah,
because the Catholic Church has kind of created its own culture that goes beyond whatever the local cultures are.
Yeah, and so for me that was just such a beautiful reflection of God's church all over the world. I was like, man, I wish that when Scott left, I didn't have to do all the things. And someone from another part of the world, especially as the gospel and the church is growing and spreading in other parts of the world, and the church is much stronger. Is that a decent term?
Sure.
In multiple continents.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have them be able to come here and pour in to the local congregation, whether it be small interim or even when we start seeking new pastors, of the fruit that could potentially be of someone else. And so,
I didn't say in attempt to say that cross-racial appointments are a bad thing.
Oh, no.
So if that came across,
but I understand that I've seen many churches not accept cross-racial appointments well, and usually it can be something that as simple as just they're hard to understand,
or the illustrations they use I can't connect with because the context they grew up in and learned is different than what I grew up in and learned.
Yeah. And then I have here, as you were talking about privilege and entitlement, where's an area that maybe surprised you at some point, that you were privileged or entitled to something, but it was so normalized in your life that you didn't recognize it until some pivotal moment?
Yeah, I'll give you two opposite examples. One was, when we went to Uganda, we wanted to get in among the people and, go to the local markets and do go to the local hospitals. And we weren't so concerned about trying to find everything that felt so familiar to us. We wanted to get into the culture. And we quickly realized we couldn't because of the color of our skin. We weren't treated poorly because of the color of our skin. We were actually treated much better because of the color of our skin. And because the assumption was, oh, you're a white person here in Uganda, that means you've got money. So there were times, there's a time one of our boys had fallen, gotten pushed a little bit, cut the back of his head on a stool. We had to get stitches. But so I went to, the clinic in town and was prepared to wait. I mean, he wasn't bleeding profusely or anything. We had gotten the bleeding slowed down and all that kind of stuff. And, sat down in the waiting room, told him our name, why we were there, blah, blah, blah. And it was 30 seconds later in a room that was fairly full of other people who had been waiting longer than us. And they're like, all right, come on back. I'm like, but these other people, and they wouldn't let me stay in the waiting room. And that was really hard. Frustrating. Had to really wrestle through that one. Other way, realizing the privilege that comes is, I guess it was back in probably around 2019, 2020. I was probably part of the peak of my running as an adult. I mentioned earlier the poor training, but the height of my training and running half marathons and 10Ks and different things, and never felt any issue. We were living in Mullica Hill. I'd go out, I'd go running down all these little country roads and around developments, even if it wasn't ours, and never thought twice about it, never felt concerned for my safety or anything like that. And a young man in, I believe it was Georgia, his name was Ahmaud Arbery, African-American guy, was running in someone's neighborhood. A couple people saw him, didn't like what they assumed he was doing there. I guess he had stopped and looked at some building that was under construction or something. I don't know the whole story. I'm not trying to say he was a saint or anything. But jumped in the back of their pickup truck, followed him, and shot him. Just because he was running in the wrong neighborhood. And I still don't know how to handle that. I still don't know what to do with the grief that comes up in me. Even just retelling that story, the emotions that I felt in that moment just come back of grief and sorrow over the state of our world, the state of our country, the state of race relationships. And realized in that season the privilege that I do have. I can run just about anywhere, not give it a second thought. Not true for everybody.
Yeah. I wrestle a lot with entitlement and privilege, and I think one of the biggest blessings of my life is going back and forth to Mexico growing up, because every time I got, you think like, oh, you go to Mexico and people take mission teams, and when we take the mission teams down, and it was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to take for granted again, all of these things. And then, 3 months later, you're taking for granted all of the things that you said you wouldn't. And so to have that constant refresher growing up to, I think all of my friends and all of my brothers and sisters in Christ that were so joyful and had beautiful personal relationships with God, but they were, just in a house of 2x4s and a metal roof with a hose over some trash bags in the yard as a shower and all of that stuff. And so I think that definitely was helpful to me. But I think one of those things that hurts me looking out in the world is in our country, the things people fight for and act as if they are the end of the world in society, and that it's the biggest injustice attacking our nation. And it can be both sides of the aisle. There's really no specific one that I feel like is whatever. And then I look out, and when I see starving people all over the world, when I see wars and genocides and bombings and all of these things where it's like man, woman, child is suffering due to the higher powers, whether it be starving to death or scared of being hit by a bomb or shot down for whatever political unrest that might be. And then we're like, well, someone wasn't nice to me. And I'm like, okay. And I understand Martin Luther King Jr. Injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. And
sure.
So I think that sadly it's been taken to the more my cause is equally as valid or important and worthy of fighting for. No matter how small the injustice is.
Yeah.
And the amount of time and attention that gets put into, you made me feel sad, when we have all the things I've already listed happening. And it's not that it doesn't deserve time and attention, and we shouldn't seek justice and correction and all of that kind of stuff. But I think it's what are we... you can fight for that in your daily life and speak into those and have influence around you against those things. But where's your time and resources and all that kind of stuff towards just the basic, in our country with freedoms and rights that we have listed out. And as we've talked about, denying ourselves, the series, it's okay, but what are actual basic needs of life, not needs that are really anything that I want and I think everyone should have counts as a need. But I think we've almost gotten far away from the caring for the basic needs of those around us and around the world. And we've pushed the potential emotional needs first in multiple regards.
Yeah, and even if some of those things are valid rights of ours, sometimes we need to lay those down. For the sake of those around us, for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of need. Yeah. Just because something is a right, like you said, it doesn't mean it trumps a need in someone else's life.
Yeah. And I'm always inspired by your favorite, Francis Chan, he's also my favorite, Francis Chan, where with his book Crazy Love, which was his biggest seller, at one point he was made aware of the travesties of human trafficking around the world, and specifically like child human trafficking, and he had a couple young daughters at the time, and he told his publisher, I want all of my proceeds from my book from here on out to go towards that. And some of his friends and peers, when they heard that, were like, but what if you have like an emergency in your family and you need the money and like whatever, and then you don't have it, like rainy day fund or whatever. And he was like, what's a bigger emergency than children being trafficked right now? And you want me to withhold helping that because of my potential imaginary emergency in the future? And then I'm supposed to believe that God's not going to provide for me at that point in my life, that he's going to stop that. And so I think it's reshaping, prioritizing, because no one would have been like, oh, you're a horrible person for making the money off the work that you've made.
Sure.
And done. But, you know, having more of that kingdom gospel centered approach and desire of God's will, and that'll look different for each and every one of us. But to at least, as we're walking with the Lord and getting closer with him, asking what that could look like and what's on his heart. And I think that's something beautiful about our prayer sessions of, what's that quote in the top right corner? Do you know by chance? Or if you could pull it up and read it for us.
Yeah.
And then we can close out with that.
It says, our hearts are often unhelpful prayer guides, so we are praying God's word, asking, what does it say about God? What does it say about me? What does it say about the world? We want to pray from the riches of God's word, not from the poverty of our circumstances.
Well, that's our conversation for today, but that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode, or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.